was pretty fancy. I spent the day yesterday making some new branding for my channel, so that's all very exciting. But what is even more exciting is the doozy of a tutorial we have today. Today we'll be making this 3D typography, this 3D metal typography that looks like it's flying through space. You can see we have some reflections here, and the cool part about this tutorial is that it is all done 100% in Gimp. So we're not using any 3D programs, we're making the text completely in Gimp, and everything is going to be great. So with that said, I really hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. I do tend to speed up a little bit in this tutorial, so feel free, if you ever get lost, to just post a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So, yep, let's go ahead and get right to it. I've started by opening up two different canvases, one at a standard HD resolution of 1920 by 1080, and then the other one using 1080, but I made it quite a bit longer, something like 2500. The reason for that will become clear in a minute. You'll first need to decide on the font, the size, and what you're going to be saying. In this case, since I've already planned this out, I'm going to be using Space Debris, and I'm going to be using the font Orbitron Heavy at about a size of 250. Typically it looks better when your two words are relatively equal in length, but of course that's not necessary. The reason we're making one more image is because when we lay out Space Debris at this size, it's a little too long to fit in the main image, right? And it'll save you a lot of time if we have everything on one row, and you'll see that in a second. So let's go ahead and open up that other image then, and then type in Space Debris. And let's make sure we get that all the way across. Perfect. Now we can start adding the effects and everything that we want to do. So let's go ahead and move this layer to the center of the image. M is the move tool. And let's go ahead and fill this image in with the rough background color that we expect to have in the main composition. So I'm going to be using a relatively dark purple, something like that. And that just allows us to make sure that we have sort of a general idea of how the shadows and how all of the metal effects that we apply to the text are going to look. The one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the Space Debris font to something a little bit lighter, so something about like this. Now we can really start applying those effects that we want. So I'm just going to zoom in a tiny bit here, and there we go. We don't necessarily need to see the whole thing. I would like to maybe get a tiny bit closer without, there we are, that's about perfect. So, in order to first do this, do make sure that your text is similar to the color that you're going to be editing on, because Gimp's alpha to selection tool is often not perfect and will leave a little tiny things at the edge. So let's alpha to selection this guy, make a new layer right on top of this, grab your gradient tool and select the gradient brushed aluminum. So, and then hold Control and stroke the gradient down just about like this. The whole thing isn't going to be brushed aluminum, we're just using this very briefly for the outside of the text. And in fact, I think I might make it so that there's a little more variation, something like that. Then we'll go ahead and go Select Shrink, and shrink it by about 3 or 4 pixels. I think I might do 4. Yeah, that seems about right. Then fill it in with a normal gradient. So you can use brushed aluminum and try to get a better angle, but I'm just going to do FG to BG and select a lighter gray to a darker gray, about like that. And then make a new layer on top, hold Control, and about like that is what we want. And actually go ahead and don't deselect that. Then make a new layer on top one more time, grab your selection tool, and make sure you're on Intersect, and drag around halfway like this. So now on this new layer, take your gradient tool one more time, except this time select FG to transparent, select a white, and then stroke up, about like that. Alpha to select this spot at this middle text layer one more time, make a new layer by hitting Control-Shift-N right above it, grab your paintbrush tool, make sure it's set on black with a relatively fuzzy brush. We can increase the size on that a little bit to about like this. Click over here once, hold Shift, that will grant you a straight line, or the ability to draw a straight line, and we're going to be drawing it right between this line right here. So you can sort of see there's a shadow beneath the gloss, which I think will add quite a bit to the effect. And then we can go ahead and reduce the opacity of that layer a little bit as well. With this layer selected again, make another new layer. A lot of this just involves gradient work and sort of making your own shadows and kind of knowing what is probably going to look good. So I drew a gradient on the top and bottom right there, and we're getting relatively close to what we want, but we still need a little extra detail. So we can go ahead and deselect that, and now we need to get to the point where we're going to merge all of these layers. So as a quick shortcut, we can first of all hide this layer, just so we have a layer, because it's not doing anything, we have a gradient above it. This will allow us just to have an extra selection layer should we need it. Also hide the background layer, and then go Image, Merge Visible Layers, and click Merge. And now we can show that again. And what this has done is put everything on a single layer so we can easily move it around should the need arise. Next we're going to grab the Curves tool. So go Colors, Curves, and here you'll have a lot of freedom in deciding what kind of shape you would like to create for your text. In this case I sort of already have one in mind, something like this. So to make it a little darker yet. Maybe add one more point up here. Make this hill a little higher. This maybe a little lower. And this is really a process of finding out which portion of your text responds to where on the curves dialog. And you might have thought that our text was transparent or black and white, but you'll notice that the brushed aluminum gradient has a little color to it. So as a result, we're getting a little bit of a color flare kind of going on from that. So let's just perhaps make one more dip here. Make this relatively dark. The thing is, we don't want too big of a contrast on this text where we made that cut before, because that tends to look a little more plasticky as opposed to the metal that we would really like. So I'm thinking that that is looking pretty good for our purposes right now. We have a nice metal sheen, and that's really, again, just adjusting it over and over again until you get an area that kind of looks like what you want. So we'll go ahead and call that good for now. And you can keep these if you would like. You can adjust the color if you would like. For me personally, I'm going to desaturate them, and then we'll adjust the color at a later state. So go ahead and go Colors, Desaturate to finish that up. And that leaves the extra bevel that we created without necessarily having like those little weird green artifacts. Right click, Alpha to selection this. Make a new layer right on top of it. Let's actually make two while we're at it. And again, that's Control-Shift-N. Grab your rectangle marquee tool, or rectangle select I suppose it is, making sure you're on intersect again. And we're going to do one more half-length glossy type effect again. So that gradient tool, white gradient, FG to transparent, on that new layer, hold Control. And while it was true that we wanted to get rid of the old very strong one, we do want to add just one more sort of in the middle there to really bring out the shininess of that metal. And then go ahead and grab that other layer that you made and grab black FG to transparent, and then we're just going to do one more shadow on the top layer here, relatively tiny. And here we're just sort of finishing out or sorting out basically what we don't like that the Curves tool left us. So there we have it. I think that's maybe a little strong, and again, this is why we do two layers, so we can go ahead and adjust based on what we need. And I'll also tone this opacity down just a touch. So I think that that is some pretty dang good base looking space text. Now we'll go ahead and open this up in our main composition. In order to do that, let's just hide this background layer again and do that same merge as visible we did before, which I believe is Command M, or if it's not, Image, Merge Visible Layers. There we are. Alright, now grab your rectangle selection tool one more time, this time making sure it's not on intersect, and let's go ahead and select this entire text right here, and then just copy that with Control-C. Alright, so let's get rid of this first layer that we made, open up a new layer, and put in space debris. That's a selection, so we'll need to right-click this selection, and we'll need to click to new layer. Now here we can see it's too long, and again the reason for doing this should have become clear, because if we didn't do it all in the same, A, you would have to do this twice, and B, it probably would not look the same. So first let's select debris, and go ahead and Command X, Command V that, and then right click to new layer. So that just cut and pasted it, so now we have two layers that we can move around on our own and position how we would like them to be positioned. But for now, let's go ahead and make this that same dark purple. Maybe not even the exact same, but just something that will give us the general idea of where we're going. That's maybe a little too dark. Something like that. Sure. We'll now need to grab the perspective tool in order to make these guys the same 3D shape, or the 3D shape that we want. So grab that perspective tool. I'm first going to work on the space layer, and I'm planning on having space be a little farther back, the S from space being farther back, and the E being farther forward. So when you adjust this, make sure that this line stays straight, because if it doesn't, it'll ruin the entire 3D effect. You also don't want to pull it too extreme. You can try it if you want like a little more of an extreme effect, but I think I'm going to be relatively conservative with how much I end up pulling out space. I think that's fine. You can maybe even go a little bit farther, and I think that I am going to make the S a little more extreme. Something like that. And try to pull the same amount on the top and bottom when you create. There, I think that is pretty good for space. And then we're going to do debris as well, except we're going to make it exactly the opposite. So we're going to make the D large and the S quite small. About like that. Perfect. And this allows a silhouette to form, and I'm going to make debris a little farther over, space around here, and debris right around here. Perfect. And now we can go ahead and start really, and you do have to make like a final decision where you want these to be placed on the canvas. Try to center them, because it gets much harder to move things in Gimp when you have a lot of layers at play. So I think that's probably fine for my composition, and now let's go ahead and make this text 3D. So in order to do so, I'll first make space 3D, and then I'll make debris 3D. So let's duplicate this layer, and then on this layer we'll right click, alpha to selection, and we will fill it in with not a black, but a very, very dark gray, something like that. Go FG color fill, make sure you have fill hole selection selected, and go ahead and fill that in. Then deselect your selection. Oops. Right, so now we have this, and now we're going to go filters, blur, motion blur. Okay, so we need to make sure that the angle is exactly straight. I think 180 degrees should be what I'm looking for. Yeah, that's exactly it. And we want to make the length long, but you don't want to make the length too long that you lose a lot of the information. So I think around 60 should work. Let's see how long that ends up being. I'm going to get a little bit of a lighter background so I can more easily tell how long I'm making the text here. So let's try this for now. Yeah, I think that should be a pretty good amount, or a pretty good length for the text. It's not exactly accurate because the length is standard and we're making it a, and then we're going, of course, by perspective, so technically the perspective of the length isn't correct, but I think for the purposes of the tutorial it's just fine. So we're just going to duplicate this layer a ton, like a ton, until you get most of the edges that have finally firmed up a little bit instead of being that blurry motion blur. We'll go ahead and hide this top layer, space layer, go ahead and hide your debris layer and background layer, and then merge the layers that are visible. So that would be image, and then merge visible layers, and click merge. And then we'll put these layers on top again. And you can see that we've created a 3D effect for space. Now we'll do the same for debris, so you can just go ahead and hide all these layers again. Go filters, blur, motion blur. This time we want the length, oops, first of course we do need to make it black, so it's alpha to selection, fill that in with black, or a color very close to black, real quick, after making a new layer underneath it, of course. And deselect that. And again, deselect is Command-Shift-A. Then we'll go filters, blur, motion blur. We want the length to be the same this time around, except we want the angle to be exactly opposite, which in this case is 360 degrees. That will blur, and then duplicate that a ton as well. and you duplicate it until you stop seeing an improvement on the edge quality. So let's go ahead and deselect that, and then image, merge visible layers, merge. So if we finally tick all of our layers on again, we can see that we're starting to get a pretty good effect on space debris, but we still have a few small adjustments that we'd like to make to this before just like layering on the stock images. One of the things I'd like to do is add a slight glow to this text to make it look like it's sort of hot, like it's almost like a comet that's kind of glowing red hot. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and alpha to selection our space layer, make a new layer on top of that, grab your fill tool, and let's pick a nice orange, or maybe like a reddy orange, about maybe something like this. Alright, so on that new layer, go ahead and fill that in, and then we'll shrink the selection a little bit. So go to Select Shrink, we'll shrink it by around 5 pixels, and then we'll go ahead and delete that. Now we can deselect that. Then we'll go Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and what Gaussian? I think around 10 actually should be fine, something like that. And then we can go ahead and reduce the opacity of that. And that adds sort of like a hot quality to the metal. We don't want it to be too much, but we'll go ahead and do the same thing for debris as well. So again, that's right click, alpha to selection to debris, new layer on top of that, same color, fill that in, deselect, filter, oh, whoops, don't deselect yet. Select, shrink, 5 pixels, delete, now deselect, filters, and we can just repeat this Gaussian blur without even going into the dialog again, and reducing the opacity about like that. And the next thing I'd like to do is decrease the, or increase the darkness of these a little bit, because I think they're actually a little too light. So colors, brightness and contrast, and we'll just tone the brightness down around 40 or so. Colors, brightness, contrast, brightness down around like that. And then while we're at it, we'll go ahead and change the brightness of the background a little bit as well. We'll make that a little darker because the stocks that we're going to be using don't play the nicest in the world with that. Okay, so I think we're really shaping up, and again we can adjust this a little bit. Maybe let's try overlay, and yeah, I'm definitely liking overlay a little more than the other option. Overlay, opacity up a little bit, and perfect. And now we're ready for the stocks. If there's one thing that you learned from a Gimp know-how tutorial, it would definitely be okay if you just took away the lesson that it's possible to make the worst design in the world so long as you just open up a ton of stock images on top and set the layer mode to dodge and overlay until it sort of covers up all of the mediocrity that you've just vomited out into the canvas. I would totally be fine if it was that lesson. So let's do that right now and just open up a whole bunch of stock images and set the layer modes differently. I've went ahead and merged these two layers and these two layers, that is the shadow layers and the layers right here, the metal layers. I did not merge these glows because I would still like to manipulate them yet because I'm not quite happy with the orange, but we'll do that later. So let's go ahead and go File, Open as Layers, and let's open up this metal image right here. Of course, the link will be in the description. You can use whatever image you'd like to. You might think it's a little counterintuitive to be opening up a metal image on a space layer, and you might be right, but we're just mostly interested in the shadow and like the shading that this can provide. So I think that I'm fortunate enough to have just found a relatively good place for this right here. There are like a lot of rivets and stuff, but I think that those are going to become less and less noticeable as we open up more star images, and this will be taking on more of a spacey feeling, and that's kind of what we want. So let's go ahead and set this on overlay, turn the opacity down a little bit, and let's give it a nice quick Gaussian blur. We don't want to blur too much of the shading away, but since we're mostly concerned about the shading, we can just give it like a blur of 20. And that should get rid of most of the rivets and larger things. Now we have just the actual effect, which is good. Now let's open up the first star layer that we're going to use. So File, Open as Image again, or Open as Layers again. Of course, you're going to be using this quite a bit. I've conveniently labeled this BG. This was a picture I found on Pexels, I believe, and the link, of course, will be in the description. I'll move it down a little bit. I like this green and red color scheme. I don't love this right here because it sort of draws the attention away. So let's go ahead and see how this looks on overlay. That is way too dark. Let's go ahead and try dodge. There we go. We'll go colors. I think desaturating might actually be a good play here for now, or we can go colors, hue saturation, and just tone the saturation a bit down, because I think that with dodge, when the saturation is a little high, it just tends to kick things up a little higher than I would like. Then we'll go colors, brightness and contrast, and we'll adjust the brightness and contrast up here quite a bit. Alright, there we are. Oops. So let's go ahead and then reduce the opacity a tiny bit. And let's actually further make the background a little bit darker. Let's try this, see if that's a little darker. Because we do want it to, of course, look like it's in space. And if this doesn't work, yeah, we're losing the purple. I do want the purple. So let's leave the purple. Let's leave it how it was, actually, and go ahead and reduce the opacity of this, or colors, brightness, contrast. Tone the brightness of this down, and the contrast up just a touch. And then also the hue saturation. We'll tone the saturation of this down so we get a little more of that purple. Good. Okay, that's looking fine. But you'll notice that we sort of have washed out the 3D effect. We do want the 3D effect, which means that the 3D effect needs to be a wee bit darker. So we can go ahead and do that, but first let's apply this same metal image to the top of this text right here. I'm going to go ahead and go colors, invert, while this layer is selected, because I've decided that I like blue more than orange for no other reason. Just in how it interacts with the general composition of this. You could even do purple. I think purple might look good as well, but we'll be adjusting the colors a lot later as well. So I'll go ahead and reduce the brightness of this just a little bit before I open up my other layer. And let's open up that metal layer one more time. Metal texture. You don't have to adjust where this is too much. We do want to try to get a nice, rather metally effect right here. So I might hit Shift R to rotate this a little bit. Oops, battery's running low. I record without it plugged in because it reduces fan noise, but we can go ahead and plug that in. Prepare yourself for the fan. We'll go ahead and alpha to selection this, and first duplicate this because we'll also need this for the shadow layer, and then go select, invert, and delete, and then deselect. And we'll move this above that layer, set this on overlay as well. And then we will do the same thing with the shadow layer. And actually, let's move this so we get a little bit of a darker selection on the shadow layer, because we don't want it to be the exact same selection. So let's try something like this. Select that shadow layer, invert, select, invert, and delete. Alright. So now we'll set this layer mode on overlay, and we'll also, since this is on overlay, we can go ahead and tone the opacity down, or we could even, in fact, I actually like the extra color that it brings to space debris, and this was a mistake actually, so we'll go colors, brightness, and contrast, and we'll tone the brightness a little bit farther up. Right. So now our text is doing a good job at looking a little more metally. Let's go ahead and add more space, because of course this is some space 3D typography. So we'll go ahead and open as layers, and just pick something that you think would fit with the general composition. So I'm going to start with this nice galaxy photo right here. You can find a lot of excellent space stocks by going to various space agencies and looking at their websites. So I'm using, in this case, the European Space Agency. They have a lot of great stocks, and you can just search what you want. So for instance, if you want Galaxy, just search Galaxy, and a whole bunch of images should come up that have, like, you know, relatively relevant results. You can comb through those as well if you want to make your own unique typography. Oops. So let's move this into position. I think I kind of want it to like frame the space, so we'll go ahead and set this on dodge, and in fact, like, that looks pretty okay already without even much erasing. We could try to see how overlay looks as well. No, it's quite dark. We could also try addition as another layer mode that tends to work quite well, but this looks very photography compared to the rest of the text. So I think dodge should suit us relatively fine, and just in case, we'll go ahead and take a large fuzzy eraser and erase around this. But first, of course, we do need to add an alpha channel because it was a JPEG. So yeah, if any of your images don't erase, it is likely because there is no alpha channel that has been added. So colors, and then I'm going to probably desaturate this as well, or actually just tone down the saturation again. If you desaturate it, you lose so much, oops, that's lightness. If you desaturate it, you lose so much of the color profiles, which sort of help make your image unique, and of course that is a little bit of a bummer. So onward and upward, let's continue to add more of these layers. So I think this is one of my favorites, the pillars of creation. I think this image in particular works excellently. Let's go ahead and add an alpha channel to this, rotate it by hitting Shift R, and let's try to find a good place for this. I would like it to be relatively highly visible because the contrast that it creates is just spectacular, I think. So something like that. Let's see, let's try dodge. Yeah, that's looking good. And we'll go ahead and move it up here. And I might actually use this image more than once as well, because I just love the sort of ripple effect that it creates on space typography. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that right there, and continue just opening up these images, mostly as dodge, and just seeing where they tend to look good. Let's try one more Nebula, the butterfly, and rotate this maybe somewhere like here. Move that, and dodge one more time. Keep saturation down a little bit. Oops, again, that's lightness. And I think nebulas in particular, just in general, work great. Let's do one more galaxy behind both of these. I think these are probably like both. No, I don't think that's Nebula. We're fine. That's super large. This is one that we can maybe even use for the background as well. Let's maybe set this on overlay, colors, darkness and contrast. And maybe even let's try, for now, addition. Oh, that's very, very bright. And so I'll grab the move tool. And again, a lot of this is just kind of based on what you think would look good for your image. I think I'm actually going to use this guy for the background because I like the stars that it's providing. However, at the same time, maybe dodge again. I think dodge is probably going to be our best bet for most of these. I like the stars that it's providing, but at the same time, I think it's a little strong with the actual galaxy in the center. So I'll go ahead and erase these hard edges and keep that nice kind of like folding, I would describe it as. The sort of edges of the nebula and galaxy provide this great folding effect, or this great extra depth effect. Alright, so I think that those look really good with these stars. And let's just do one more pillars of creation in order, because I love that red and green. So open those layers. There we go. Rotate them. And continue this going. right here. And again to dodge. We'll maybe have this hugging the D a little bit. Okay, great. So I think our space text is pretty close to getting finished. The one thing that's really tying this back yet is that it's not quite all tied together. So we have this great space background, I think, and we have this pretty cool metal text going on right now, but we're still missing a few things. So we need to do a few final lighting adjustments on the text, and then a few elements that will be reflecting off the text in order to fully complete this photo manipulation. Okay, we're approaching the home stretch, just a few more edits to make, and sort of overall design choices. So back on this metal layer, I decided I didn't quite like the strand that was right here, so I picked out a relatively darker color, picked the paintbrush, and then brushed over it about like this. I still like the light that this strand is giving us. It almost looks like a light ray that's sort of like going down, but I didn't love that quite as much. I didn't feel like it was working quite with the composition of the piece as much as I'd like it to. Over here, I feel like we have this metal text. I think I may have lightened that, but if I didn't, then we'll go ahead and duplicate that on overlay, and maybe tone, or even go colors, desaturate, so we don't get it quite so colorful, but this way people can see the metal effect, like right here, especially with the bezel. I think it almost looks like a chrome type effect that we worked so hard to create. A few other changes. The pillars of creation, I think that I'm going to erase some of the middle of them, because I like the framing effect that they're doing. I don't love this huge swath of red in the middle, however. So we'll go ahead and delete just a little bit of that, and watch out for those edges there. I think that's looking much better. Finally, I think that this galaxy thing we put in here is working out quite well, except I don't want these stars to be drawing so much attention away from the actual text in the middle. So I'm going to be erasing some of those about like that. So I think that these are just like overall design changes that are going to make it look a lot better. Finally, these ones that we did before, we're going to change those to purple. So colors, hue, saturation, and we'll go ahead and, the saturation, we'll go ahead and change the hue to a little bit of a purple, so like something like 80. And then colors, hue, saturation again, and we'll go ahead and change that again to 80. We want them to look relatively similar. And since they're purple, we can now maybe tone the opacity down on those a little bit. Maybe like 60 as opposed to 40. There. Now let's work on pulling some of these elements together. So we'd like some stars or maybe some dust to be in front of this text as well. So to that end, let's open as layers, and I have this star selected, which of course will be available. Right click, add an alpha channel because it was a JPEG that we saved, and we'll set this on dodge as well, and then go colors, desaturate. And that'll be fine, yeah. So now let's move this right here, and maybe make it a little smaller using Shift-T for scale, and let's go about like that. And then move that in front of the debris. And we want it to make it look like there's maybe even two little meteor type or comet type things rushing past. So first let's go ahead and blend the hard edges away from this. I do like the cloud that this star came from. And now let's make our own star for once. You could probably just compress this, but this is a nice technique if you do want to make your own stars, so I'm going to show it. Let's fill this entire thing with black on a new layer, and then go filters, light and shadow, lens flare. And move the lens flare in the center, because that way you avoid these artifacts kind of skirting off into the side. So let's get that in the center. It doesn't have to be exact, something like that. And we'll also set this layer mode to dodge. Now we'll go ahead and grab the scale tool, and on the scale tool we're going to compress this layer like crazy, so something like that. And when this layer is compressed, you can desaturate it or leave it. I think I'm going to leave it right now. I do kind of like that red. We can maybe even make it like a yellow, so colors, and then we can go color balance, maybe add a little yellow to that, or even blue Yeah, I actually think purple looks fine. But we'll add yellow for now and see how that works out. And then of course you can always change this later. And we will need to erase, because we intend to duplicate this, so we kind of want it to be sort of one-sided. So we'll erase about like that, move it, and then you could also do this with perspective, but I'm going to do it with rotate for now. We'll rotate this to an angle that hopefully matches our debris. And do try to get an exact angle, because it will add to the depth of the photo quite a bit. And if we want that tail to be even longer, you can just duplicate the layer again and move it back about like that. And we can even then reduce the opacity of that layer to make it look as if the star is coming back. And because dodge is such a sensitive layer mode, depending on what's behind it, you might find it necessary to have to adjust the color of the star in order to get like the right hue that you would like in order to make it look like it's continuing. So let's duplicate this whole setup. So you'll need to do each individual layer. And I'm going to, in order to make it look like it's not exactly the same star cruising by, I'm going to maybe flip this. So flip tool, we'll flip it horizontally for now, and maybe we'll even make it a little bit smaller. And maybe even rotate it a little bit, about like that. And then we'll go ahead and duplicate this layer, and then move that behind it now. I'm going to move it even a little bit closer yet. And then, oops, wrong one. Maybe here. And in order to make it look like they're coming from different angles, we'll even rotate this one a little bit more toward this way. There we are. And I think that's looking really good. And the final thing I'd like to do is add a little bit of debris that goes on top of space right here. So we'll open as layers. We can open up one more image. The image at this point doesn't matter. Let's open the butterfly image, sure. And then we'll rotate that to something like this. Set that to dodge. And ooh, that area is quite heavily populated right now. Let's try maybe just getting a few artifacts on top of it to make it look like it's not completely out of, or it's not completely just floating on top. Alright, so if we compare, yeah, I think that's looking much better. And we can even duplicate this one more time and then move that down to the D as well, or the debris as well. Just to sort of really get the action, like this whole space debris thing. Debris is actually like a part of the composition. So perfect. We're really getting there. The last thing we need to do is just some overall image color effects and some cinematic choices. So just as a choice, in order to make it look more cinematic, I'm going to be adding black bars to the top and bottom of this image. So new layer, and then fill in the selection with black, and then deselect. And we'll go ahead and move that, and then duplicate it, and then move that to the bottom as well. About like that. And, ooh, actually I did think of one more thing I want to do. We'll go ahead and make a new layer above everything else. This is the last thing besides the color adjustments, I promise. I know this tutorial is going on pretty long. Let's go ahead and grab your gradient tool, FG to transparent, set it on radial with white as your color. And we'll just go ahead and make a transparent gradient, a transparent circular gradient right here. And we want it to have a hard edge, and we don't want it to be so big that these edges also are hard. So we'll just have it go about like that. Deselect that, and you can see right here that what we've created is just this sort of like half image type thing. And let's go ahead and crop the layer just for the sake of ease. So we'll crop it about right here. And now we'll go ahead and rotate this, and we'll rotate it about like this. The goal is to have it sort of like glancing off the end of space, as if it's like a sort of cosmic ray So let's set this layer mode on overlay, duplicate that a few times, and then we'll duplicate it one more time, and we'll move it slightly off balance of the other one, and then duplicate that a time or two. And then in order to add a sort of orange flare, this is white, so we can't just colorize it immediately because all of the values are white. So we'll need to first go colors, brightness, and contrast, turn the brightness all the way down, and then go colors, colorize, and go ahead and try to find an orangey red type color. And then colors, color balance. You could have started with this as well, but we need to add a little yellow to that in order to get the orange we want. Alright, and then we'll go ahead and maybe set that on dodge, and we'll tone down the opacity a little bit, and oops, we can even move this if we wanted to create a sort of 3-tiered type look. And this sort of looks like maybe there's, I don't know, cosmic rays or something coming through. Yeah, and I think that's looking pretty good. I would like to maybe move those a little closer to the E, so I think I am actually going to do that toward the end of the E, because I think that that's sort of the area of the text that's feeling the most left out right now. We could put these in a layer group, but if we put them in a layer group, then oftentimes layer groups do not blend correctly with the rest of the image. So we'll go ahead and clean this up. We move the red down here. Alright, there we go. So I think we're very, very close to the end. We'll just go layer, new from visible, and let's grab our gradient tool one more time. Grab the gradient incandescent, which should be right here. And then we'll go colors, map, gradient map. And if you wanted it to be fiery, you could leave it like here. Our image is a little dark, so you'd want to like increase the lightness a little bit before. But we'll actually just leave this on normal, and then just tone the opacity down a little bit. And while that does eliminate some of your blues, it ties the image together because it makes the overall spectrum that we're actually using a little bit narrower. We're really at a hardcore purple right now. And yeah, that's about it. You could try continuing to add some layer effects if you wanted to. Sharpen might also look good, but you do need to be careful when combining sharpen and dodge, because that is a quick recipe for having your image look kind of overexposed and pixely. The last thing we could do is make one more layer from visible, and then go colors, hue, saturation, and then if you found that your whole entire image was a little saturated, oops, that's lightness again, every time, you could reduce the saturation of the image just a touch, and I think I'm going to do that. It's not a massive difference, but I think that it just adds a tiny bit more to it that makes it a little bit better. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I have an outro screen and music now that should start playing. Please, again, like I said in the beginning, don't hesitate to leave any comments for help, or any comments like regarding the tutorial, like at all. I look forward to reading them all. And yeah, I'll see you guys within the week. Thanks for watching.